Welcome all to Pensando Xībānyá. First of all, I'm going to thank all the sponsors from the event. We are going to, I'm going to start with the sponsors. This event has been made possible thanks to graduate student organization from Stony Brook, the Department of Hispanic Language and Literature, Department of Asian and Asian American Studies, Women, Gender and Sexuality Studies Department, the Institute of Globalization Studies, and the Charles B. Wang Center at Stony Brook. It also has been made possible thanks to Skidmore College and the Department of World and Language and Literature. We also have external sponsors, Casa Asia from Spain, Colectivo Liwai, Antirracismo Asiático, and Tusanaje. Today's event is going to be led by Mary Kate Donovan. Mary Kate, she's an associate professor. Assistant professor of Spanish at Skidmore College. Her research and teaching focus on contemporary Spanish literature, film, and popular media. Her work has been published by academic journals, including Arizona Journal of Hispanic Cultural Studies, Bulletin of Hispanic Studies, Journal of Spanish Cultural Studies, and Revista de Estudios Hispánicos. She's currently working on a book that projects her studies, the studies of representation of the Chinese diaspora in contemporary Spain. Without further ado, I'm going to give Mary Kate the voice, and she's going to start introducing the event. Thank you all.
Thank you, Moisés. Thank you to all of our sponsors, and especially to our 3 invited guests for today. So welcome to this first event. It's a series of 3 roundtables that we're going to be hosting between now and April. And this series focuses on voices from the Chinese diaspora in Spain. And today's conversation, the first installment in our series, will focus on cultural production. And we have 3 guests with us here today that I'm so thrilled to introduce. And I know many of you in the audience are familiar with their work. All of our guests are going to be talking about visual cultural production in some way today, or their work is related to visual production. So I wanted to share some images related to their work as I introduce them. So I'm going to go in alphabetical order by their first names. So our first guest today is Chenta Tsai, also known as putochinomaricón to some of you. He is a musician, producer, and author. Their first LP, Corazón de Cerdo con Ginseng al Vapor, was released in 2018, followed shortly thereafter by a second record, Miseria Humana, in 2019. And their music has also appeared in a number of television series and other places where you might have heard it. So here I have the covers of both of these records, which I think are part of what make them so interesting. As a performer, Chenta uses makeup and fashion in provocative and engaging ways. In 2019, they published a book titled Arroz Tres Delicias, Sexo, Raza y Género, that combines memoir with reflections on topics including racism, xenophobia, homophobia, and misogyny. Chenta is also a regular contributor to El País, where they write a column. Our second guest today, Jiajie. Yuyan is a filmmaker whose work has been screened at film festivals internationally, winning prizes at the Thailand International Film Destination Festival in 2 consecutive years. Notably, his film Xiao Xian was nominated for a Goya in 2019, making it the first Mandarin language film to be nominated for the award. His work displays a sophisticated and sumptuous use of color, as we can see here in some stills from the short film. And it's really beautiful. If you haven't seen it on the website, you can find it on his website, and we've also linked it on ours. And some more examples of his use of color in a music video that he directed for the Prussians. And he's currently working on his first feature film, a project that I'm very excited about, and one that has been selected for the Residencia de la Academia de Cine. So maybe he can tell us more about that today. Quan is an illustrator and author. She began publishing vignettes about her life and her family as a webcomic titled Gazpacho Agridulce, later releasing her first graphic novel with the same name in 2015. In 2017, she published a sequel, Andalucinas por el Mundo, which focuses on her experiences as a young adult and those of her sisters living abroad in France and the United States. She has collaborated with a wide range of media outlets and cultural organizations, including El País and other places, to produce work aimed at educating the public about implicit bias and racism. Here we have one example that addresses stereotyping of Latinas and promotes intersectional feminism. And most recently, Quan released a graphic essay titled Gente de aquí, Gente de ahí, which challenges readers to interrogate the way we think about national identity and belonging. And she also shared with us this illustration to celebrate the Lunar New Year. So I thought that I would include that as well. So please join me in welcoming our guests for today. I've prepared a few questions to kind of guide our conversation, but I really hope that they will just serve as a jumping off point for a conversation. I'm mostly interested in what our guests have to say more than in my questions. So we've reserved about an hour for the roundtable, after which we'll open the floor for questions from the audience. Everyone's mic will remain muted and individuals can choose whether or not to leave their cameras on. If you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat. Today, Moisés will be monitoring the chat, and during the Q&A, we'll take questions from there for our speakers. So first of all, I would just like to invite our guests, if there's anything else that you'd like to add to the introductions that I prepared about your work, if there's anything that you would like to share with us about what you're working on currently.
In which order? I mean, you put the questions super broadly.
All right, well, then I think I'll just jump in with one of the questions that I prepared. So the subtitle for our event is Voices from the Chinese Diaspora. And I know that diaspora can be a very slippery term. It often refers to a homeland. And I'm imagining that each of you has a very different relationship to this idea or this notion, whether you were born in Spanish territory or not, if your family comes from mainland China or from Taiwan. So I wanted to ask each of you, do you identify as part of a diaspora, and what does diaspora mean to you? So maybe, Jiajie, do you want to start?
Okay. Okay. Thank you for the invitation, Mary Kate and Moisés. I mean, I'm not sure about, I don't think in terms of diaspora, because for me, I think that my parents define themselves much better as a diaspora than myself. I'm not sure about my my identification, but normally when they interview me, I say I am like a Spaniard with a Chinese origin. So that's why the way I feel much comfortable about my own identification, but I'm not sure yet. Actually, I mean everything. I mean every term means I don't know how to say. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I feel very, I feel the same way in reality. I'm okay with people identifying me as part of a diaspora, even though I'm not sure what parameters people use to identify oneself, no, as diaspora, because I used to understand my body through la racialización, no? O sea, I'm not sure if in English it's the same, but like racialization perhaps. In some way, it's a bit similar to what Dubois said about the double consciousness, no? Of how you perceive oneself, how you perceive yourself and how the exterior perceives yourself, especially the white gaze, no, from the white gaze. So yeah, o sea, at first I understood my identity from the racialización, but little by little, especially now that I just moved to Taiwan for over half a year, I am understanding my body as a kind of like a container of identities that are constantly shifting, changing, flowing, contradicting themselves, a bit like the meme between the two Spider-Mans, like they're pointing at each other, but they're actually the same thing. And in some way, I kind of feel in peace, not knowing it completely, no? And putting that question mark in reality.
In my opinion, well, when we call diaspora, I don't know who is calling a diaspora. It's of ourselves, o sea, nuestro terminology, or is it not part of the racializado or the diaspora people who need to categorize us this way? So yeah, I don't know. Well, many people, I see there's many people here, so I will put a little bit more on context. In Spain, they used to call us, or they still call us, the median, the people, to second generation of immigrants, which is very bad because we are not immigrants. I have migrated from nowhere. I was born here. So at first, I accepted that terminology because for me, it was more important that somebody understand me, like understand what I'm meaning. But then it wasn't okay anymore. Since I was more involved and studying more of this terminology and studying also my own identity and observing it, the second generation of immigrants started to feel really offensive. And then I always tell them, I am the first generation that is being born here, or I have a Chinese descent or descent. Sorry, my rusty English. And then diaspora seems more nicer than being migrants or immigrants or something, because also the tag that you consider yourself, it affects how you relate to people and affects how the people perceives you. So is diaspora a good term? Maybe as Jiajie or Chenta was saying before, maybe it is better than for our parents that have more a closer relationship with the country of origin. I do agree with Chenta that I feel myself too as a fluid identity. That means that the experience that make myself who I am today is not monocultural. It's multicultural or bicultural. So yeah, who is in Spanish acuñar, or who is making that word? In one session, I was frustrated because I could not find any word to describe it. And some person said to me, maybe you need to create it yourself, because the name that other people is going to give it to you is never gonna fit for you. So I'm thinking like that. I'm feeling a lot more comfortable, like fluent identity in culturally speaking.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I kind of want to jump ahead to one of the other questions. I know I sent them to you earlier, a little bit further down on the list. So kind of thinking about what you all were saying about terminology, the way that that's evolved and changed, and even your own thinking about the kinds of categories you feel comfortable with or not is evolving. I was wondering how you feel the representation of the community of Spaniards of Asian descent, Chinese descent, the diaspora, whichever kind of terminology you want to use, how the representation of those communities in Spain has changed within maybe just the last 5 years even, let's say like since you all started producing work. Do you think that those representations have changed? Do you think that there's a change in the conversation about race and racism in Spain, or only in certain circles?
I will start, because I actually was speaking about that in my book, Gente de Aquí, Gente de Allí. So what Jiajie, Chenta, and I do is very niche. So we arrive to certain people. We are not in the mainstream media. We are not on national TV shows. And what is in there? I mean, there is talented people, of course, that they do their work, but they don't have this cultural ethnicity sensitivity towards the Asians or towards any minority, I will say, ethnically speaking. And because the majority of people that are in charge and are creating content are not either racializados or either for migrant ascent, well, ascent, descent, family,
I think descent.
ascent. Yeah, that there is this big lack of sensitivity, and the representation is not how I look myself. If it is mostly how they look and how they think we are. So full of the stereotypes you can see it on the language. It's like they're always in the news. A few months ago, a a big
Factory.
building got burned.
Mm-hmm.
A factory got burned, and there was many. Is it okay to say black persons? Because in Spanish, it's good to say black persons. There were black person there, and the news showed like there was 74 immigrants in there. So, okay, you are fomenting in Spanish say otredad, like these are the other people. What happened is the people that are burning there are immigrants, that they do not suffer. That is not. And in the mainstream media is shaping people's mind talking this way because language has a lot of power. So I always talk about that, okay, we're still not many people, but talking, for example, this mainstream thing, I don't know if you all guys know about the Bridgertons Netflix TV show. Well, it's a love Victorian thing, and they have a lot of sexes thing, and there is an intimacy coordinator working in production that makes sure that the actors are fine with that no abuse is being committed, and they are being comfortable showing nudity. And it was so obvious because since forever there was intimacy and sexism on TV shows. So why could not have that, like ethnicity coordinator or something to make it, more respetable or more careful and sensitive towards minorities in the media?
Yeah, so I agree with Quan 100% on the first on the importance of creating non-hegemonic spaces and art or culture for us by us, no? Not by, claro, o sea, non-racializados, as I feel like representation right now is still an illusion, as there's no real redistribution, nor there's a willingness to actually change the paradigm, no, of how, for example, Asian people are represented on TV, on media, etc. And it still goes down to instrumentalización, and tokenization, no, or whitewashing or exotification or orientalization of our bodies and our content to find acceptance, no. So yeah, I think there still is that. That I think they call it like no, I was going to say bamboo sitting, but that's another concept. But for example, another, like, o sea, I notice it a lot, especially in the industry of the people that are supposed to shift and change and transform this como the culture that we are consuming, no? For example, the same, o sea, recently, I don't know if I should say this, but I'm gonna say it. Venga, de perdidos al río. For the Nochebuena, no, actually for Nochevieja, there was a program on public television that the same one that actually asked me to sing there 1 year ago. They asked me to go back and they proposed me to be the Chinese person that ate the sopa de murciélago, the bad soup on public TV. And the premise of that sketch, which was supposedly funny, I don't know where I can't find it funny anyway. It was that they were going to save coronavirus by going back in time and stopping me from eating. And of course, when they told me this, I was like, o sea, what is representation in reality, no? O sea, and is this ¿cómo se dice? Is this interest for the long term? Or are they just interested because right now this subject and this topic is being touched by many people, no? That question also rose when they wrote this to me, so that's why. So yeah, I agree 100% with what Quan says.
I'm so pissed listening to you. Super pissed.
Yeah. It feels so good to be saying this.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with both of them. I think that we are at the beginning of the change. And for example, I think that the three of us, we are a good example of that change, what that means. Because I want to believe that more and more will be more voices and artistic from the Chinese origin, that they will move away from the cliches and the prejudices. And I think the cultural production, the subject of this conversation, is like a key element to change those perspectives and the ideas they have about the China, about the immigration.
Yeah. One of the questions that I wanted to ask you, and thank you all for sharing your personal experiences related to, working with the media. I know that in all of your work, it's at least somehow related to your experience as Spaniards of Asian descent or Chinese descent. And I was wondering, do you feel like there are any common references that connect your work to the work of your colleagues and peers? On the one hand, like, is there a sense of a kind of cultural reference point that's shared? And then on the other hand, and this kind of relates to, what you were saying, Chenta, do you feel like your work is ever limited by a public perception that you have to make work that is like Chino?
Yeah, o sea, I'm going to start then. O sea, 100%, even though we are an extremely heterogeneous community, each body having different oppressions, no, crossing them, diferentes opresiones que les atraviesa el cuerpo. There are some vital experiences that most of us have shared, no? Like, for example, when the first time I read Gazpacho Agridulce, o sea, it really, o sea, it was like a turning point for me, because up till then, I've never felt reflected to that, como hasta ese punto, to that point where I said, wow, o sea, I feel like this person is talking directly to me, no? I remember this sketch, o sea, this comic strip that was something like, cuando te atiende otro banana or something like that. And it talks about how, how when you go to a restaurant or a shop that sells Chinese products and the owner is also Chinese, and ¿cómo se dice? Como the dialogue that you have with this person, no? Or for example, an amazing comic which is called American Born Chinese. Also, o sea, I felt very reflected with it, especially in a part where it talks about this boy in primary and another Chinese, I think he was Taiwanese actually, another Taiwanese boy arrived school, and the feeling of rivalry and not wanting to talk to this person because people might think that they are the same family, in some way like sparked like, I don't know, like a common ground that we shared, no? So yeah, o sea, from these examples, I realized that how sharing vital experiences in reality is political, because you realize that a lot of the experiences that you thought were individual are actually shared, no? And are structural and social, such as racism. So that's why.
Yeah, I do agree with Chenta too, but I haven't read anything before I start publishing because there was nothing to read like in Spain. And I'm talking like not so long ago, because I started publishing like the strip comics in 2015. So I was like, yeah, I have absolutely no idea how the people is gonna react. But through all these years, one thing that got me the most is basically what Chantasai to me right now. People that say, oh, there is a voice that I feel represented to, because I feel that what you're telling is my life, and I can connect with you especially in terms of identity and the feeling of isolation, because most of us, I mean, I know Chenta after I started publishing the stuff. So we got into one of these meetings and we became friends, and it was really nice. And another writer, well, she's in there in the public, Berna, she said, oh, you are my friend, Chinese, well, Chinese, but not so much friends. I haven't got during all my life, because our surrounding, it's all by Spaniards. Because that's how society still is. It's not that common to have Chinese friends, because we weren't many. a few years ago. So it was super interesting sharing the identity issues, because I think a lot of us, or the majority of us, struggle a lot with the identity and like not fitting in. Like you are not quite Chinese and you are not gonna be super Spanish either for the Spaniards. So you are in this space in between, this fluid identity that monocultural people does not understand. And I think it's not like styles or graphical representation. I think it's more the universal feeling of feeling lost and isolated while trying to encounter yourself or finding yourself.
Oh, can I add that another thing that really inspired me by Gazpacho Agridulce is that her characters were real and they were fleshed out, you know? They actually escaped those limits that we usually saw, those limits of representation that we usually watch, no? Of, digamos, the Chinese person that regenta un bazar, or the Chinese person that works in a Chinese restaurant and doesn't have, are not fleshed out. So yeah, in reality, that really touched me, and yeah, I felt very connected with their characters because of it.
Es que growing up, sorry, Jiajie, growing up with
No,
is super fun. I just wanted to add that growing up without anybody saying that what you can do, which is normal for Spaniards or no Asian people, and your family that because they have suffered racism harder in their skin. For example, my parents are super proud now that I'm here, but before they were like, nobody's gonna hire you. You are Chinese. Do you think the Spanish people is gonna accept a Chinese person on the companies because they have suffered so much before? Hopefully not. Luckily, menos mal, luckily they were super wrong. And I'm today talking to you and I've published books, and yesterday I was on TV, you know, Chenta is a singer and Jiajie is a super good cinema director. But you know, nobody told us that it could be possible. And we were like jumping in the blackness of being blind. Like, what is this? Am I going to be able to do it? You don't know. It's just, it will give me so much peace of mind while I was growing up, knowing that the thing that I wanted to do is possible. Just that, knowing that there is a way.
Yeah, something that I would love to share, that I don't know if you guys have the same feeling. I guess so, that when I was young, I have denied my identity. I have feel like ashamed of being Chinese, right? And actually, I didn't have any Chinese friends until now, until I came to Madrid. And right now, that's something important because we can support each other. You can share our experiences, and like Gazpacho Agridulce or Chenta, all other Chinese artists, they can talk about their own experience. You can have like a reference about that. So that, I think that's something really, really important, because you can talk about the cultural clash between China and Spain, and you feel kind of like isolation because you Spanish friend, it's impossible that they can understand how you feel, right? Yeah.
100%. And I think up to what Jiajie said also, I think that in my case as well, o sea, for me it was so difficult to find not only Chinese but Asian or POC in general artists, no, that were also queer or trans or disidente sexual o de género, LGBT plus. And I really thought that we didn't exist, and the only representations that there were actually very demonized, which is a bit what we're talking about before. So yeah, o sea, it wasn't until I saw, do you know Los Pistons, which is a group in Spain? I think it's from the 90s. When the first time that I saw in this case, a Taiwanese person on TV making music and just wearing jeans and como, no sé, no sé qué llevaba, la verdad. But, you know, and just being himself, you know, and not having to exotify orientalizarse in order to find acceptance. He was just being himself, and he was just, you know, he wasn't doing anything special, and that's what made it so special.
Yeah, Chenta, I know that anecdote from your book, actually. I wasn't familiar with the group before that, but reading your book, I looked it up and I saw the reference. So that kind of relates to one of the other questions that I had for you all. I mean, in your book, Chenta, you talk about kind of like looking outside of Spain, and Quan, in your recent book, you do as well. I mean, Jiajie, I think you can see the influence of different cinema traditions in your work as well. So I was curious about, in thinking about the anti-racist movement in Spain, and even just these kinds of like cultural references that you talk about, what do you think are the benefits and the drawbacks of looking towards a history of similar movements in other ways? So in the United States, in other parts of Europe, elsewhere. Yeah, I'd love to hear what you think about that.
For me, like the drawbacks is that we just accept the movement without making any introspection. For example, okay, in Spain, we consume a lot of American cinema. We consume a lot of, you know, entertainment, books, and a lot of stuff. So when something happens in America, it actually arrives pretty quickly here to Spain, like the Black Lives Matter movement. But then, you know, the drawbacks of that is good that we are getting more sensitivity because other countries are, you know, revising themselves. I just read one comment about how Disney are like putting signals about, you know, some of these films has racist stereotypes and you should take into account. They're not censoring, but they are acknowledging that what they did is stereotypical and it might not be so good for children to watch. But, you know, Spain also, like any other countries, had its casuísticas, its own history and its own stuff. So, okay, we can receive the influence because also when think pandemic are globals and think in world are globals too, like everything, movements are global too. But we also need to think about how, my cat is over here, how that affects in our country, of if it fits or if it doesn't fit, or how we can make it ours. Because when I was researching for my book, I had a lot of information, researcher from American studies or American papers, because you guys have been like studying that in advance a lot. And it was really struggling for me, information that is made in Spain. Or like having or when the book, like now kind of the first stuff, because I was also researching of a Spanish identity. So basically that's it. We need to reflect and not just accept other discursos like if it were on its own without adapting into our own, you know, context, so sociocultural context, because we have our own issues that we might not be super the same, and we need to acknowledge that. Otherwise, you know, local things that happen here can feel very invisible, and local problems can feel really invisible too.
Yeah, o sea, I think that adding to what Chuan said, it's so important to, o sea, remember that because of the influence we have with similar movements and with history outside Spain, digamos, we should also acknowledge that what happens outside doesn't only happen outside, it also happens in Spain, no? Because when the Black Lives Matter movement, o sea, it's always been there, but the Black Lives Matter in 2020 happens, a lot of Spanish people were sharing the black square, yeah. And they were talking about how, but at the same time they were talking about how this was something very local, that this only happened in the States, no? And this never happened in Spain. But in reality, we also have to acknowledge the violences and the structural racism that happens in Spain, los CIEs, no? Los centros de internamiento de extranjeros, or, yeah, o sea, ¿cómo se dice? Las redadas policiales, when police stop you on the streets, that also happens in Spain. So, o sea, una cosa no resta la otra, no? And it's true that because of the influence that John was talking about, we have to acknowledge that the things that happen in wherever also happens in Spain. So yeah, it's reciprocal as well. And also it's important to acknowledge our history, no? I always talk with a lot of my communities, the importance of remembering LGBT plus history, besides the Stonewall, which is so important. And I don't want to restar importancia, I don't want to take out importance, but it's true that there has been also a lot of resistance in Spain that we also have to remember because it forms part of us and our history.
That's great.
Yeah, that explains too well. I don't have anything to add. Yeah, I totally agree that we have to be conscious and be aware that we have the same problem in Spain, because it's too easy to see the violence outside, but we don't see the same problem here in Spain. And as Chenta say, when the people put the black square in the social media, it looks like they feel much better from themselves. They don't have to think about how they are in their own life. You know what I mean? It's like desviar el discurso. I don't know how to say in English. About the real problem. Yeah. ¿Cómo?
Deviate?
Yeah, deviate the speech. Yeah, and the reflection. Yeah, so for me, this is something really dangerous.
Yeah.
Just to add into that point, you know, the ethnically or this kind of thing for Spain is kind of super new in a terms of, because when I was doing, I don't want to be like, I'm talking about my book, but because I learned so much stuff doing that book. First, I do some Instagram question to my audience, with the majority are Spaniards. So, mira, I asked them, do you think you're white? And what does make you white? Like belonging to the European Union and what? And people, Spaniards, don't know what to answer me. And some of them answer super long answers about, I don't know. Because when I go, for example, living in the UK and there is an ethnicity things that I need to check, I don't know. And then some of them goes outside, think they're white, and they find themselves that they are not. They are person of color in some places, they're Mediterranean, or maybe they're Hispanic. So Spanish reflection about this is still super new. And the other thing that I learned very much, it's about the racism terminology. So the majority of them, imagine, I made a, well, not imagine, it actually happened. I made, and it's in the first page of the book, I made a test and I asked Spanish people to rate themselves from 1 to 10 how racist they are. So most of them rated to me, yeah, they consider themselves 2.5. That's the average of racism. And the reason was, like, sometimes unconsciously I do something racist, but it's not because I think that, you know, other races are below me or anything. It's just because I acknowledge that I don't know sometimes. But then the following question was like, do you know people that are racist? And 90% say yes. So the logic says that if the people don't consider the same racism, you are not in a racist country. But the same people that say we are not racist say all the people surrounding are racist. So this is the racism, Schrödinger racism. O sea, nobody's racist, but everybody's racist. So it showed me that the true thing that the insight about that is this is super new. Nobody had started thinking about that because it's not in their personal life. I mean, Spaniards speaking, most of them do not have a racializado migrants or migrant descent friends. And the thing that we're talking about seems super far away for them because it's not in their daily life. Their daily life, it's being related with González, somebody who speaks super clean Spanish, and that's it. So what we talk about sometimes is even strange for our own friends. Like, whoa, I've never thought about it. I've never thought that you do not celebrate Christmas like we do. And it's like, yeah, it can be because there is many different religions and many different way of life. So it's not just one tradition to respect, there's many.
So, I mean, thinking about what you've all been talking about in terms of like not living in a monoculture, being pluricultural. I also wanted to think about that a little bit in terms of language. I know that language kind of plays a role in all of your work. I mean, I'm thinking especially about your film, Jiajie. So if you think about existing between two cultures or even more than two cultures, what role does multilingualism play for you, for your work, in terms of thinking about that fluidity?
Yeah, in my case, unfortunately, I speak really bad Chinese. That's something that I regret, but that is because when I was young, I denied my identity, so that's why I didn't want to learn Chinese. That's something that right now I want to improve myself. But I'm multilingual. I'm multilingualism as well because I speak Spanish, Catalan, a little bit English. So for me, the language is really, really important to define your identity. And right now, for me, like right now that I don't speak Chinese, I feel that something is missing about myself. I don't know how to explain, but it's something that I really regret. And actually, I was thinking to go back to China to start learning Chinese because I think it's really, really important.
Yeah, I am still learning to embrace my multilingualism, which is Spanish English. But because I feel like I have been rejecting it for a very long time, no? And because of it, in some way, I feel like I don't speak any language properly. And in some way, I kind of find it cool, but at the same time, it's a headache. But yeah, I would love to write, I don't know, I would love to write music in Spanish English. I think it's just been because of some type of like reticencia inside of me. I don't know, or wanting to feel accepted. The reason why I am writing in Spanish, but yeah.
I mean, well, we're switching around with different terms here today. So I would think we're clearly all in a multilingual group already.
Yeah.
I've been reading this book that I do recommend all of you might have all read it. It's The Lies That Binds from Quan Anthony Appiah. He talks about language, and it's a really, really nice paragraph. So we can understand the language in different angles. One is to communicate. That's we're always speaking right now here in English because it's a tool that I'm using so you guys can understand me. The other thing is the language using as an identity or as an expression of yourself, not to be understood, but an expression of who you are. And one really good example is one colleague of mine, Minke Wang, he had this his obra de teatro. This is where I met Chenta. Well, with one of another meeting, but I went to check the theater, and he had written this beautiful Spanish play, and I understood nothing. Like just verbally speaking, understood nothing. The way he used the words, it was so magically played that even though they are speaking my native language, could not understand anything. So there, the language was of expressing an artistic expression. So for me, it is really interesting to see how, that collides. And the tool, the identity thing, the artistic expression is super interesting. And in reality, the multilingual thing, the majority of what we now so-called naciones estado, states or countries are multilingual in a sense that, for example, Spanish is super small. We have Catalan, we have Gallego, we have Valencia. And in Chinese, like, I don't know, infinite, I think. I speak one dialect and the city nearby in 100 kilometers speaks another one. So yeah, it's very enriching.
Totally. And I don't know if it happens to you, but in some way, I feel there's like a sadness that is provoked when I think about how I can't communicate to its totality with my family, because my family speak to its totality in Mandarin, but I don't know how to speak in Mandarin perfectly, or I can't connect with my own roots because of the limited knowledge of my language, which is what is happening right now in Taiwan. And so I don't know if that happens to you both.
Yeah, I have the same problem with communicating with my own parents, to be honest. It's really, really frustrating because sometimes we don't know how to make us understand. Right now, thanks to the movie that I am writing, I am asking and trying to learning more about them to try to keep like a conversation to know about their own history, immigration, and everything, even the language. Yeah, but
Yeah, so
For
that,
me,
oh, sorry, Quan.
sorry about the I speak the dialect that of my hometown, and I'm happy because I know this dialect eventually is going to die, because Chinese, most of the Chinese cities are teaching their boys and their kids Mandarins because, you know, it's useful. If you know the dialect, I can only use it in my town or speak to my grandma. So that is really nice. But on the other hand, it's, you know, really sad being able to speak that's something that you know is gonna die. And the sadness is also happens to me that, well, not the sadness, that I have a special thing of feeling, for example, in Chinese, for Chinese language, that I don't have in English. Even though I speak English a lot more fluently than I speak Chinese, there is this language, not just for the sake of language, but for me, Chinese is roots. Chinese means cultural heritage. So I feel like, even though I do not speak very well, it's like something connected that means family and means, you know, that kind of thing. And also one thing that I was going to draw about, that, for example, when you speak multi-language, you see how your character change along the different languages. Because yeah, because I sometimes super frustrated, even speak very nice English, like I could have said that a lot better in Spanish. Frustrated. And in Chinese, it's like, oh my God, I'm like dumb. I mean, my parents might think that I'm dumb because my Chinese is so basic.
I sound so rude. I sound so rude when I speak in Spanish. And recently, my friend said that my Chinese sounds like an old grandpa speaking. It's my because I haven't updated my language yet. So that's why when I speak here, I sound like an academic, like from 100 years ago. You know, I don't know. It's so funny.
I feel like I was about to interrupt earlier, but mostly because I was hoping to hear a little bit about your new film, Jiajie. And also, I would just like to hear from each of you, what are some of the projects that you're excited about, that you're working on now, things that we can maybe keep a lookout for, whether it's music, writing, visual culture.
Okay. Actually, as I said before, I'm working on the script of my first feature film. It's kind of like a personal story of my own family. I mean, it's not 100% reality. There is some fiction in the story. And actually, it's like a Shanghainese family from Shanghai that they came from Barcelona. And I want to portray this family in 3 different times. In 1992, because of the Olympics war in Barcelona, 1999 because of the millennium change, and then 2010 after the World War crisis. And I want to talk about this family in Spain through the female portrait about my sister, my grandmother, and my mother. So it's like a really, it's about a Chinese community in Spain with my own family.
It's really exciting.
Thank you.
I'm actually researching for the continuation of Gente de Aquí, Gente de Allí, but I'm reading, I'm taking that slowly. And Gente de Aquí, Gente de Allí took me a long time, so I think this research is going to take me a long time. It is very difficult, huh? It is very difficult.
Yeah, well, I am working on my EP, which I don't know when it's gonna get released. And it talks about, well, I'm trying to talk about online spaces and virtuality and its relation with queer POC bodies, no? Exploring, for example, the violences that one se somete, when one encounters when they are in these spaces, and what it means to be, yeah, o sea, queer POC in virtual online space. And yeah, o sea, you can follow me also in my column, in my monthly column in Rock Deluxe. Okay, it's good because before my column was weekly, and in some way it kind of burns you, to be honest. O sea, but not as much as la época, the time when I was writing the book, because in that moment I was a radio host of Nada Especial, which was, and I loved that project so much, but because they changed Ayuntamiento, they canceled it. And the album and the touring and the book and the column, and I was like, listen, I can't. So yeah, so right now I'm actually relearning how to do nothing, doing my EP and working on my column, my monthly column.
That's great. And another question that I had kind of related to your work is, what are some of the most important references that you draw from artistically for all of you? That's maybe a hard one.
Yeah, I don't know. Like visually speaking, narratively speaking,
or maybe just what do you feel most inspired by when you're making your work? Doesn't even have to necessarily be a cultural reference.
I think like the people we speak, for example, this panel. And I told you before, like the meeting started, one of the seeds that made me do the work was like being so teacher when we met last year, because he taught me so many things that it triggered so many stuff in my brain. Like, wow, like how, for example, this is a silly thing, but how the Asian are good in math stereotype were born. And he told me about the American history and how that stereotype, he said, oh, Americans, we do export racism to Spain too. We do a lot of things nicely. So you also in Spanish see that guys are good, Asian are good in maths, even though Spain hadn't had that history. So he taught me so much in one day that it was one of the seeds. And yesterday, a podcast, I think, I don't know, it's, what I do is, I think I would call it very human. It's like relationship among people. So that's why when I encounter interesting situation with people, I get super inspired to work. Yesterday I was in a podcast with two Spaniards, and Enrique, well, the guy who was the host, he would say, apologize for me maybe being rude, but I had absolutely nobody to ask. So could you explain to me if this is right to say, like, the question, where do you really come from and why is that offensive? And that, but he was really eager to learn. So that kind of thing was like, oh, this is eye-opening. No, well, not eye-opening, but really nice, and it does trigger a lot of things while creating. You know, I haven't encountered, even though we are talking about how Spain has had many issues to address toward racism, maybe because I've been surrounded with very nice people, but the majority of them, when you sit them there and talk, they are super eager to listen. At least the people I'm surrounded. Like, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? So, and yesterday, I'm just telling that because yesterday I had that thing with a podcast and it was super nice. And the other woman who was in the podcast, her name is Bea, and she said, it was very hard for me to accept that I'm racist because it's very ugly. You know, we all agree that racism is a bad thing. So it's hard to accept that you have racist traits and you behave racist. Sometimes even you don't want to. But she also understood that even though she has racist behavior, doesn't make her a racist person. In a sense, like, you know, the feminism movement, we are all born in a heteropatriarchy society. So we are not by default feminist or unicorn. So you need to deconstruct yourself. You need to learn. So it was very, very inspiring to have the conversation with those two, seeing them open and seeing them accepting their flaws. I think that gives me a lot of fuel for keep researching and keep, you know, looking for things to talk about.
O sea, I think that my references are very similar. O sea, I think that the BIPOC community really inspires me, especially the BIPOC community that is also sex and gender dissidences, ¿no? En plan, disidentes disidentes de género y de sexo. Like Don't Hit a la Negra, which is a collective of BIPOC bodies who create safe spaces for justamente queer, trans, BIPOC. Also the ballroom community led by POCs in Madrid, no, especially like Galaxia La Perla, who's also one of my dancers, o sea, when we were touring. And these spaces are so important just because of what John said, because it teaches you about allyship and your position in and out of the community, no? Like, for example, in Taiwan, so one of my wishes was to connect with my own roots, no? Which is a bit like this fantasy that a lot of Netflix TV shows are selling you right now. Like, oh, I am POC, I'm going to go back to my roots and discover myself and stuff. It's a bit like Come Reza Ama de Julia Roberts, pero a la inversa. En plan, you're not actually, you know, o sea, colonizing, pero, o sea, so it was very funny because I realized how hypocritical it was in my position to say I wanted to connect with my roots in Taiwan, considering that I am Han, ethnia Han, and not considering the people that were before here, no, o sea, the indigenous community. And I remember this conversation I was having with a friend, and he was like, o sea, I don't take it personally, but well, yeah, take it personally. But you know, o sea, when you're talking about your roots, you have to be careful because there has been a story de, ¿cómo se dice? Como, ay, yeah, there is a story. O sea, we owe the indigenous community, and we have to know our place and our privilege in Taiwan. But apart from that, I am super inspired by trash culture. You can see by just looking at my room. By Chinese folklore. I love Hu Tianbao, which is from a book that recopilates, that collects like stories that, so what the author said, como are banned or are seen as something negative by Confucius, no? Because they are like unorganized, they're chaotic. And Hu Tianbao, for example, is a Chinese folklore ¿cómo se dice? Como un ser mitológico, which is a rabbit. And basically it's it's a folk tale that is uno de los pocos folk tales that talks about queerness, no? Because the character is queer and they catch him once like spying on a military, I think, and they start beating him and he dies, no? And then he reincarnates into this rabbit. And in a dream of someone in the village, he says that they need to create a shrine for him. And that is how Hu Tianbao comes. And for example, there's a temple in Taiwan, que está erigida, that's risen for Hu Tianbao. So I am super passionate about like history, like Chinese folklore, but from a dissident, like sexual and gender dissident perspective.
Chenta, when will you come back to Madrid? Just for
That's
curiosity.
a good question.
Okay.
I have a concert. I have a concert on the 28th of March, but I don't know.
Okay. Because I'm planning to go to Taiwan maybe this summer.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
You're gonna like it.
Yeah, I know. I mean, because my he's in Taipei. So I was thinking to go there. I was thinking to go last year, but I couldn't because of the pandemic. So maybe this year could be like a good moment. Yeah, in my case, I have a lot of references. Most of them, they are from China and from Taiwan. I love Edward Yan and Hao Xiaoxian, directors, because they connected with the kind of movie that I would love to do with the family and the relationship between different generations. From China, I mean the mainland China, I love Chen Sanke as well. Actually, one of my favorite movies, the last one, something about the mountains beyond. I don't know the name. In Spanish, it's más de las montañas. I don't remember the name in English. So actually, yeah, I have a lot of really good references for my movie.
That's awesome. So thank you all so much. I feel like we could just keep chatting away the rest of the day, afternoon, night, depending on where you are. I realize we have very different time zones, but I do want to leave some time for questions from the audience. So Moisés is helping us kind of sift through some of the questions in the chat. But we have one from Professor E.K. Tan at Stony Brook, who asks, as the pandemic gave rise to anti-Asian racism in Spain, awareness and activism against racism no doubt increased too. What are some of this activism in Spain in the response to COVID? And are you involved in anti-racism with your writing, music, and art?
I think that there is a lot of movements happening in Spain, especially in collectives such as Catarsia Barcelona, or for example, who else? But I know that they were moving it a lot because back in last February, when the racism was rising even more, so we started creating allyship between communities and activist collectives to respond to people who have suffered any type of aggression or abuse. So I do think that there has been a response, and about about whether we manifest anti-racism in our work. In my case, I feel like it's in some way inevitable, that you're going to speak about these things just because it's so intrinsical, it's so connected to your identity, in the sense that you live it day by day. There's this activist whose name I forgot, but basically they talk about how our bodies are understood as political territories, that just by being BIPOC or a woman or from a sexual or gender dissident, you are a political territory, in the sense that you are already making activism just by walking down the street, or just by having Afro hair, or just by embracing yourself. And I always identified, saving the distances, of course, with this concept of political territory, and how I see and write music, because most of the time I like to talk about mundanity and la cotidianidad, the costumbrismo. I don't know if there's actually a word called costumbrismo.
Not such a good one. And I think you mentioned this activist in your book, right? I think it's Dorotea Gomez Grijalva. Is that right?
Yeah,
that
Dorotea.
was just, from your book, I know.
Oh, I hope that she doesn't hate me. No, but but I really do think like that even though you're speaking about mundanity or anything, or say, for example, just by writing a song about your experience as a BIPOC, about with Wi-Fi, with your Wi-Fi connection, that is also political. Or just by standing on a stage where usually the artists that stand there are white, cis, heterosexual men, not abled men. So yeah, I stand by that, the concept of political territory.
Great. So we have another question here. I'm just trying to find the next one. It's such a vibrant chat that I think I'm losing some of the questions I was trying to keep track of. So we have
to get my charger. Just a second.
Okay.
Mary Kate, I could read it if you want.
Yeah, Moisés, go ahead. You're on chat duty. Thank you.
Late asked, Disney employed cultural sensitivity coordinators on recent films, such as Moana. Does anyone know of an example of a Spanish media company employing cultural advisors in this way?
Yeah, so that's a
0.
question from Lee Mercer, I think.
I have no knowledge. No, I haven't acknowledged any of that. 0. In fact, they're like throwing things, such as Chantasai, like, yeah, let's come here and eat bad soup, and we found it hilarious. And that's it. Now, there's no second thought. No, not that I know.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah, like you wonder there's really no one on staff in that room in the meeting that says, that's not a good idea,
Have I got
Wow.
stories? Have I got stories? Hey man, no, there was, can I say it? O sea, this feels a bit like an exposed kind of like channel from YouTube, but literally, o sea, there was this, there's this horrible TV show. There's this horrible TV show in Spain that's been signed by HBO. It's actually in HBO. I'm not going to say their name because they don't deserve the credits. That basically has this extremely xenophobic, racist como narrative, and it attacks not only the Asian community but all the community, by como se dice, fomenting stereotypes, etc. And they called me and they told me what my role was there, which was basically, the story goes that two friends who are Spanish go to Madrid, and one of them hates Chinese people because her ex left her for a Chinese woman who was selling latas de cerveza en la plaza, like how do you say, like cans of beer in the square. And ever since, anything that reminds her of Asia or Chinese more like, she hates and she reacts negatively. And basically that's where I step in. O sea, she goes to a concert and sees me and starts screaming and leaves. And I'm like, do you really think I'm gonna take this offer? And the worst thing was how do you say, like how, even though I told them that this was problematic, they wouldn't change it. So I just said, listen, I'm not gonna take this. But I have stories to tell. O sea, I really want to write a book, a novel, a thriller, an anthology. Es que cabe para una antología, literalmente. Of all the experiences, the racist experiences that I have gone through in the industry, the same as the tokenization, no? Es que there's too much. Let's go on. No, es que si no nos quedamos aquí.
Well, if you want, we can organize a separate meeting just for that.
Okay.
I have a sad anecdote. In my case, I was sitting with a scriptwriter. We are writing like a TV series, and the main character is from China. The scriptwriter put her name Kumiko, and she's supposed to be Chinese.
Yeah.
That's the main problem, that they don't even care about to have like a minimum documentation of the name.
Oh
so it's really sad.
I'm going to put a little bit of light. Okay, there is no like mainstream media like that kind of responsibility to do. They just, the clickbait and the thing that people come the most. But there is responsibility for individuals. For example, I'm gonna tell her name. She's Moderna de Pueblo. She's also influencer, and she draws and publishes comics. She have 1 million followers, and she called me like, Quan, can you give me some advice, because I'm gonna put a Chinese character and I don't want to stereotypify her or being feeling offensive towards the Chinese minority or whatsoever. So she told me about her idea, because she said, it is for me difficult to find anything of this on the internet, and I always end reading you because you are on the media and talking, so I might just ask you directly. So she took her responsibility or the portraying persons of ethnic minorities and go there and try to do it right. She can make mistakes, but she's willing to, and she's very open. But she's also an individual, not a whole company or big media. So, well, to put a little bit of light.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, how do you make the change so that more individuals take the personal responsibility to do that kind of work? And, you know,
Totally.
so we have a couple more questions. Moisés, do you want to read the next one?
Yes. Daniela Flesler from the Hispanic Language Department at Stony Brook. I'm trying to find the question. There's a lot of conversation, so.
I think I have it here. I can read it. She asks, are you involved in any initiatives or collaborative projects involving other racialized groups in Spain?
Should I?
No,
O sea,
in my case.
I've been more active before the pandemic, but it's true that after the pandemic, I haven't been as active because I reached the point where I had to self-care as well. But before, I worked very parallelly with especially the BIPOC LGBT plus scene. For example, I work very, ¿cómo se dice? I helped organize a lot of fundraising festivals with Don Quita La Negra. We collaborated together. Or for example, I have a periodical party which responds to this kind of ceiling that all BIPOC people have to get through, o sea, that atraviesan when they are artists, and the limits in response to the limits that they find, no, when they are, o sea, when they want to create something. And I wanted to create a space where we could, o sea, ¿cómo se dice? Where we could highlight, and the lineup was exclusively BIPOC. And it was Code Gotele, but due to COVID, we stopped the project. So in reality, o sea, I also was in Sos Racismo up till last February, I think. So yes, o sea, I have been working, but more in the shadows, with a lot of people in reality. And yeah, o sea, yeah, sorry. Wow, my English was so bad in this section. Pero bueno.
I sporadically work with some non-governmental organization, and not specifically just talking about Asian diaspora. You show one example that I do is for Latino women. Apparently in the north of Spain, in the Basque Country, I work a lot with them. They have more budget for that, you know, for ethnic and racial sensitivity. So it is very nice sporadically. So I combine them along with my different jobs.
Yeah. We have a few other questions. I have one from Azor Rosa, who asks, who is your main public? Like, who do you perceive to be the primary audience or for your work?
I mean, I don't know. I honestly tell you, I don't know. I just make book and somebody, you know, want to read it. You know, but the thing is that then somebody when I was doing Gente de Aquí, Gente de Allí, you know, I was talking with one of my mentors, and she said, yeah, you have a lot of, you know, education work that you could do about that, but I think that the selling of that book is going to be difficult. I understood that because, you know, the soul searching, we talk about things that are not so comfortable to read about because you see your flaws, and then in less than 2 months, the first edition is sold. So what? I don't know. People just happen to read it. But if I need to be totally honest, I think when I write or when I draw is for the girl I was like 20 years ago. I would love to have been reading that kind of content when I was growing up, like, so I do not feel lonely or lost. And this book, it was definitely for teenager one. Like, please, I would love her to have read this, so she understood what was she going through.
Yeah, I think my public is very similar in the sense that I think what connects a lot of my public, I think, with me is that we were all put in that otherness, no? And it's very surprising how just by that, so many people from different communities can connect, because the people who listen to me are not only exclusively BIPOC people, but also, I don't know, o sea, it's a very vast community. So I really think that what connects us is that otherness and feeling like you don't belong anywhere, no? I sound a bit like Avril Lavigne right now, but it's kind of true. I don't know.
Yeah, me too. Actually, I would love to connect with mad movies with the widest possible audience. That I don't want to be like would be like a really specific audience that they're only interested in Chinese movie. I would love to like everyone can go to watch the movie to better understand the Chinese community in Spain, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know that there was another, this made me think of you, Quan. There was another question that I'm sorry, I forgot who wrote it because I saw it and I didn't, I wasn't able to copy it, but about the individuals, especially women who were adopted from China into Spain. And that made me think of the article that, or the like open letter that you published in El País when Generación Meiming came out.
Yeah.
And that I thought was like a really nice connection and a very like direct communication with a group that would be conceivably your audience. It's like a younger generation.
I mean, I think we have some similarities, but not with you know, orphan girls from China. We have this panel for Asian diaspora. Chenta and me was there, and there was basically these 4 different categories that we found that we were like different identities, like the one who were being born here, the adopted people. The one that arrived here were adults, and the one that arrived here as a child. So we have a lot of similarities, but then, you know, there is this herida, I mean, this injury that these girls could have, I mean, are going to have, like, why my parents rejected me? I am not valuable enough. That is inevitable to have, and you need to communicate a lot with the child. Although I am not a mom, and I don't know how you know, how can a person suffer. It affects how it affects your whole person. I mean, you are in a country where how you look like, it affects how the people relates to you, but you know, your family is not your biological family. So I think it's very complex and it's very hard to address.
Yeah.
And there was this girl, she was Galician, well, her family was Galician, and she said that, yeah, my family is Spanish, and somehow her relationship with China had been racism. And because while growing up, you know, you have all these attacks toward your ethnicity. I had this rejection phase, so I cannot imagine her, like, she have a Spanish family, maybe their parents wants her to keep the Chinese connection, and all she received from being Chinese originally is society not so good treatment. So I think it is very difficult for her while growing up, and it's difficult to address that problem. And there is this disconnection sometimes because parent does not understand that. Parent has never suffered racism. And sometimes you have this romantic idea to have, yeah, I have a Chinese daughter and she's so beautiful. But in reality, maybe your Chinese daughter is being bullied at school and you know nothing. It's very, very difficult.
Yeah. Well, this is also a topic that I hope we'll be able to cover in one of our future panels as well, with one of our invited guests who is working on some of those issues in her own work, Inez. So I hope we have time for a couple more questions. I have 2 lined up. The first is from Gemma Perez Sanchez, and this is for Chenta specifically. And she asks, how has your experience with Spanish white LGBTQ+ people Do you think there is any understanding about their own involvement in racism among that community?
Well, that's a very good question. I think that question is, we always think about it, no? O sea, in our community. I think that the willingness to understand intersectionality is going to the right road right now, no? But it's still very performative and it's not integral or sincere, no? In the sense that, for example, they still don't understand that, for example, not liking a whole race, like not liking Asian people, is not, ¿cómo se dice? It's not a choice. It's actually racist, no? O sea, because they talk a lot about preferences. For example, they don't understand that. Or for example, with the new ley trans, the ley trans that we are right now doing in. A lot of people forget that people who no tienen papeles, who have, no sé cómo se dice no tener papeles.
Undocumented?
Yes, o sea, they can't, la ley trans is not going to, ¿cómo se dice? They are going to experience this, la ley trans from a very racist point of view because they can't change their o sea, their identity because of it, no? So I still think that there is, even though there's a willingness, it's still very performative and superficial. And I don't know, there's so many topics, I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's a bit the summary.
That's like its own panel, I think, as well. It's
Yeah.
a good question. Another question from Jeffrey Coleman. How do the panelists feel about being role models for Asian Spaniards and other BIPOC people today?
So many responsibilities.
Yeah, a loaded question.
I always say that if I'd known this, I might not have done it. It was like,
Same. I think that whenever I give a conference or I speak, I always say like aviso de contenido, like that everything I say, it only reflects me because it's impossible for me to represent the whole community, no? In the sense that we are so heterogeneous and there's so many types of bodies and identities that it's impossible for me, because of my privileges or my oppressions, to be able to represent everyone, no? And insist on allyship and understanding and listening, no? Not only, inside the Asian community, but also allyship with other communities that are BIPOC, no, as well. Which touches a bit the subject of the model minority myth, where, and that's another thing that actually differentiates with the States and Spain. I was discussing this with another friend, whether he thought that the model minority myth actually existed in Spain, or was it more of a cultural glitch? Because in reality, if we see the immigration or the representation of Asian people in Spain, o sea, for example, ¿cómo se dice? Como the percentage of students, for example, in universities that are Asian is not we can't compare it to the number of percentage in the States, for example. And in some way we can play, jugamos a la ventaja, ¿no? Con ventaja. O sea, it's advantages for us because one of the cons about the model minority myth was to divide the BIPOC community and to put Asian people against Black, Latin people and demonize them, no? So I think that these like cultural glitches and misunderstandings are actually beneficial because we can create our own narrative and we don't have to, and we can learn from history and understand allyship from another way, no? So that's why.
That's great. So I think we'll just do one final question. I know we're right at our time, but Marcela Garces asks a question for Quan. I really appreciated your comment about writing for yourself when you were younger. Can you tell us about your thoughts on your Instagram presence and how social media might help younger generations feel represented, and or if you sometimes feel negatively about social media in this respect? And it's a question for you, but I think you could probably all speak to the role of social media in your work and in a lot of these questions of identity.
I mean, social media, yeah, it's super nice, and it's also super dangerous. I mean, right now, Instagram is getting for old people now, because all the younger are on TikTok, judging in China and doing videos and, you know, dancing like this. I feel super old. So yeah, in my time, you know, those years ago when I was it was a really nice, you know, altavoz. It was a really good thing. So people get to know each other when the mainstream media were ignoring you, because you see, we spoke about this before. Not racializados in the mainstream media, and they only start paying attention to us when we got important in the social media. So it is maybe the first touch point that somebody young is gonna access to your content. And then you have a responsibility publishing your content, especially if you have a broad audience, because something that I know is going to be read or be in forever on the internet, you need to be consequent with that. That's who, you know, politically correctness on who you are, on who says what. For example, you all right now hear that this guy, well, the ex-president says Chinese virus made legitimate those kind of attacks. So you need to be very careful with the language and what you say, especially for young people. So it was good for, you know, getting to know the person, but it also have some backlash, like the hater, people that just go into your content and start putting hate messages because whatever, they don't bother to read what you do. And behind the screen, we are persons. And yeah, my content, you might not like what I put, even though I'm talking about social stuff, but we forget that we attack something, there is actually somebody behind reading it, and that might suffer. Sometimes when I had that kind of comments, I'm just, you need to log off. There's a maximum of comments that you can read negative, and does not, you know, don't get crying or saying, why am I doing this? This is so bad. And even that you do things with good intention, the social media, especially Twitter, sometimes is super hard. Well, Twitter, I don't know why Twitter is so full of hate. I just don't know. But well, and now with Clubhouse, I don't know if you guys are aware of Clubhouse. All people are saying that moderation is going to be the key. But when I enter into Clubhouse, there's an actually different feeling of, you know, actually hearing somebody talk, because you feel it more human. I don't know, maybe just, you know, the screen or the photo, even though there is photo of us everywhere, the humanize the people, the person behind the screen. So yeah, social media, it is complex. It is super complex, and kids need to be taken care of while they consume their stuff.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for this really engaging, fun, provocative conversation. Thank you to our three invited guests, Jiajie, Chenta, and Quan. I really hope that those of you who are in the audience will join us for the rest of the series. Our next event is coming up on March 24th at the same time. It's a Wednesday, 1 p.m. We're going to be focusing on writing and diaspora. We have Berna Wong, Paloma Chen, and Susanna Ye as invited guests. And the third and final event for this series will be April 14th, also a Wednesday, also at 1 p.m. We're going to be talking about activism and education. And we have Antonio Liu Yang, Inez Herrero Gomez, and Yue Fu at that event. So I think that Moisés popped the links to register in the chat, but you can also find all of the links there on our website at pensandoxibanya.com or .com. So thank you once again to our guests. This has been really wonderful for me personally, and I think a lot of our members of the audience feel the same way. So thank you for your time and your work. Thank you.
I'm from Generation TikTok, literally, yo. Thank you for coming to this session.
TikTok generation. I sound pretty bad.